Joseph Carney, site agent on the south tower of the Penderdome shopping centre on the day the main support column was installed, is accused of murder or manslaughter. An official inquiry, chaired by Ramsay Bellenden, has found that the collapse of the Penderdome on September the 14th, in which 8 people were killed, was due to the faulty installation of the A column. For the prosecution, Mr. Lloyd has attempted to show that on the day of the installation, Carney was in a bad state of mind, not only because his wife had left him, but because he believed the building itself to be misconceived and a waste of public money. Mr. Martin O'Connor for the defence has now called Carney to the witness box for the final day's hearing in the case of the Queen against Carney.
You are Joseph Carney of 80 Wester Springs Road, Fulchester.
I am.
What is your present occupation?
I'm out of a job at the moment, but until mid-September last, I was employed as a site agent by Helleby's, the building constructors.
Did you resign from this job, or were you discharged, Mr. Carney?
No, sir, I was discharged.
Why was that, please?
In October last, the Bellenden inquiry said that the Penderdome shopping centre had collapsed because a column in the south tower, known as the A column, had been improperly constructed. I'd been responsible for that installation. I was therefore held to blame.
Did you accept your discharge from Helleby's as a just consequence of professional ineptitude on your part, Mr. Carney?
No, sir, I did not. I protested in writing to Mrs. Jean Ryder, the general manager of Helleby's. I stated that the inquiry was wrong in its findings, and that on January the 10th, the day of the installation of the column, I carried out all the necessary checks, as the story of my report will show.
I see. Now, to come to your attitude towards the Penderdome as a project, then. We've heard how you hated it. Why did you hate it so?
Well, I don't know that I did, to begin with. Well, I mean, a shopping centre was needed in that part of Fulchester. But it was when I saw how things were developing, and more to the point, how much they were costing.
Part of your objection to the Penderdome was the amount of public money it was consuming, then?
Yes, it was. Well, they kept changing their mind about things. As you could read all about it in the newspapers at the time. The budget kept going up and up as they thought of one new airy-fairy feature after another, and all to achieve political ends, as far as I could see. There was that dome, you know, especially and expensively designed to produce some kind of fancy light, in effect. Yes, and the King Kong muscle. Now, here's a point I'd like to make. No one's made it so far. King Kong muscle is 3 times as expensive as steel and reinforced concrete. That's a waste of money. It's a waste of ratepayers' money. Do you know we've had an 80% increase in Fulchester rates even without that?
Your views, however, are not so strongly held that they could conceivably lead you into anything resembling criminal action, though.
How do you mean?
Well, have you ever in the past had any trouble with the law, Mr. Carney?
No, of course not.
No convictions of any sort?
Yeah.
Charges?
Yeah, no, sir, this is a set-up, isn't it? I've done nothing wrong. I was not careless about that column on the Penderdome. I know that. It's a set-up job, isn't it? I'm here as a whipping boy for somebody else's mistakes.
Now, you said that the Bellenden inquiry was wrong in its findings, Mr. Carney. What grounds do you have for that exactly?
Well, none, really. I mean, what I meant was that it seemed to me that, well, they haven't done their job properly.
Why?
Well, look, I've been in the construction business for something like 15 years. I built myself up from nothing, from a brickie. And I knew from just working with it, you know, from just using it, that, well, King Kong muscle would never support the weight of dome it was supposed to.
That's a bold statement, Mr. Carney.
Yes, I know. I can't help that. You know, people on the other side of our business, the architects and executives, they don't know about stuff the men who work with the materials do. You know, you get a feel for the stuff, new stuff especially, and you understand what it's capable of.
So you're saying that being on site all day, actually handling the material, you're probably in a better position to get the feel of it than people who only see it on a drawing board.
Stands to reason, doesn't it? I mean, architects and people like that, they don't have to handle the stuff, do they? They don't have to put it in place. Do some of them good to find out the hard way, you know, come up the hard way, you know what I mean?
Mr. Carney, we have here in evidence a specification for King Kong muscle claiming for it exactly the super strength it is alleged to have.
Well, in that case, my lord, I don't agree with the agreement specification. And I don't have to tell you, it wouldn't be the first time that boards like that have been wrong.
Mr. Carney, it's been stated that on January the 10th you were in a bad emotional condition, upset.
Yes, I was, yes, I was.
Well, will you tell the court why, please?
Well, you've heard why. My wife had left me, hadn't she?
And this was the reason for the distress that was observed in you during the day that followed, was it?
Well, I should think it was. What else?
Yes, the jury might also have noticed that Mrs. Carney decided to absent herself from her husband's trial today. Did you, as a result of your distress, say things to other persons that were perhaps ill-judged, not entirely meant?
Yes, I did, yes. Yes, there were several incidents like that during the day. Well, it had hit me for 6, you know, Brenda going off like that. I mean, I knew things weren't too good between us, but I didn't think she'd actually leave, you know. And I didn't know then about that fancy man of hers, you know. Well, I was in a terrible state. I didn't know what to do. I thought at first that I wouldn't be able to go to work, you know, but then I realised I had to give me something to do. You know. I think looking back on it, that I was a bit out of my head for a while that day. I think I was a bit free in what I said to Mr. Claudius and Mr. Sefton, you know.
Could be maintained, of course, that being a bit out of your head for a while that day caused you to become careless, not pay due attention to your work.
No, sir, that's not true.
Cut corners.
No, that my reports
Take chances.
show that I carried out all the necessary checks and inspections. And I'd like to make this point. In all my years in the building trade, there's never been one complaint, not one, against my standard of work. You know, this inquiry, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, Mr. Belladon got up and he said something like he thought maybe the nuts that held the bolts that held the A column down hadn't been applied to the right tension. Di-da-di-da-di-da. You know, it's daft. It's just daft.
You firmly maintain, then, that you in fact made no error on January the 10th and were in no state of mind that might have made you prone to error.
Yes, that's right, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Carney.
Thank you, sir.
I've no further questions, my lord.
It looks as though he's finished his examination. You can slip into the public gallery.
So, Mr. Carney, you tell us that you're convinced you made no error in installing the A column on January the 10th.
Yes.
Well, how long did the whole job take, Mr. Carney?
I'm sorry.
What period of time did installing the column occupy?
Most of the day.
That's morning and afternoon, you mean, both before the lunch break and after it.
Yes, that's generally what's meant by most of the day, yes.
And the men you were working with, were they the same men all day?
How do you mean?
It's not that difficult to understand, surely. Was your workforce throughout the day composed of the same individuals, or did it change from time to time?
What you probably don't know, sir, is that on a building site there are lots of things to be done. I mean, a fella can be working on one job 1 minute and get called away to another the
Yes,
next.
it changed, in other words.
Well, I suppose it did.
Considerably, Mr. Carney.
How should I know?
Ah, you don't know. Well, then you couldn't say then with any confidence which men were working with you at any given point in the day and which men were not.
Now, look,
And were these skilled men, Mr. Carney?
They all knew their job, sir, if that's what you mean. Some of them had been on building sites for years. You don't get taken on these days, you know.
No,
unless...
what I did mean was, were they tradesmen or were they labourers?
Well,
Yes?
well, labourers for the most part.
Labourers, for the most part. So then, there was nobody but you to know when, in fact, each stage of the installation of that column had been satisfactorily completed on January the 10th.
I suppose not. Then after all, that's what a site agent's for, isn't it?
And nobody but you to know when the nuts holding down the securing bolts had been applied to the right tension.
Look, I thought of that job properly. I know I did. I may have been a bit upset, but I did nothing to sabotage the Pentadome project. And I didn't make any damn fool mistakes either.
Your wife had left you without warning. Your marriage was in ruins. And you were only a bit upset.
I had things under control.
You were agitated. Mr. Claudius has remarked on that fact. And you kept continually rushing off to telephone.
No, I didn't.
Well, Mr. Claudius has testified that you raced away to make one call, even as he was talking to you. And your wife has told us you were trying to reach her at work all the morning.
I made perhaps 3 phone calls, 4 maybe, but it did not take my mind off the job.
Then at lunchtime, you went out and you started to drink.
No.
Oh, you deny you were drinking in the lunch break on January the 10th?
Look, I had a couple of whiskies, that's all.
Yes, well, perhaps you have a bad head for alcohol, Mr.
There's nothing
Carney.
wrong with my head, sir, thank you.
Well, you'd certainly had enough to drink for it to be quite obvious to Mr. Sefton when he spoke to you a full hour or an hour and a half later.
No, I didn't.
And here's the interesting thing, you see. Your threats, your inferences of possible criminal action, of sabotage, etc., they're all made after you'd been drinking.
Now, that doesn't mean anything. I explained to the other gentleman about that. I was just upset about everything. I was talking wild.
Yet with a remarkably single-minded purpose.
Blowing me top.
You did, in fact, fail to apply those nuts on the securing bolts to the right tension on January the 10th, didn't you, Mr. Carney?
That's a lie. You can't prove it and you know it.
Then what else makes sense?
Well, it was that damn King Kong muscle. It's no good talking to you. You don't understand what I'm talking about, do you? That pentadome. Yes, that's a lovely word, isn't it? That's your socialist architecture for you. Well, I'll tell you something. I hate it. And all it stands for. All my life, I've gone it alone. I built myself up from nothing without any help from anybody. And what have you got today, eh? Go on, have a look. What have you got? You've got a handout society, haven't you? There's no need to put your back into anything if you don't want to. Just laze and loaf around and everything's done for you, right down to the last bloody thing. And if you want to do a good day's work, what happens, I'll tell you? Nothing. As good as laugh in your face. Call you a fascist to your face. Well, I'll tell you something. Nothing special's ever been done for me. Nothing. Ever.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Carney. No further questions.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Jean Catherine Ryder, and you live at Underedge Hall, Prestbury, Cheshire.
That's right.
You are also General Manager of Hellaby's the Building Contractors.
I am.
Might be remarked that you have rather an unusual job for a woman, Mrs. Ryder.
Might be answered that women possess just as much executive ability as men.
Not to mention feminine intuition. At all events, your firm was awarded the contract for the building of the Penderdome section of the new Fulchester Shopping Centre.
Yes?
Mrs. Ryder, we have heard that on January the 10th last year, you told Mr. Sefton a consignment of King Kong muscle you received a day or two earlier had been recalled by the manufacturers for a check. And you recommended that material received before that should go back too. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Now, will you tell us why you made that recommendation, Mrs. Ryder?
And why did I suggest that all the King Kong muscle should go back, do you mean?
Yes.
Well, as it happens, I didn't much care for the attitude of the manufacturers in the matter. They were quite evasive about why they wanted the latest consignment back. Something very obscure about hardening processes and a possibility of an individual section being faulty. I inquired, was this something that could be expected to occur with King Kong muscle? The manufacturers claimed not, but then went on to say that since they were dealing with a new material, they had to take every care.
Was Mr. Sefton putting pressure on you to get on with the construction of the Penderdome?
We were a little behind schedule, it's true.
Did Mr. Sefton, in fact, forbid you to return the whole of the King Kong muscle for further checks, as was your instinct?
He didn't forbid me, no, he didn't have the authority to do that. He did, however, impress on me that such a complete check as I had in mind would, of its nature, take a lot of time, and would almost infallibly prove to have been unnecessary.
And that swayed you, did it?
I decided to have a word with some of the men who were working with King Kong muscle before finally making up my mind. There was the site agent who was that very day installing the A column of the South Tower, Joe Carney, the defendant.
Why did you decide that, Mrs. Ryder?
Sometimes the men on the job can help clear your mind when you're in doubts. They see aspects of matters that you miss.
So you spoke to Mr. Carney, did you?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Well, regarding that, he said at once that all the King Kong muscle should go back. He said he hadn't taken to it from the start, and he didn't believe it really had the strength to support the dome.
Did he advance any cogent reason for this view?
No, my lord, he said it was just the way he felt.
So, although you've told us you spoke to Carney to clear your mind, you didn't take any notice of him?
Other site agents on the job didn't think as Joe did. Anyway, we were dealing in imponderables, hunches. You can't really run a business efficiently on hunches.
Looking back now, Mrs. Ryder, do you wish perhaps in this case you had taken heed of Joe Carney's hunch?
To that I must answer yes. My own feelings were originally quite imprecise, but I was naturally prepared to accept the architect's specifications. But I don't care what that inquiry found. I take Joe Carney's view now. I believe there is some undiscovered weakness in King Kong muscle. I believe it is that weakness that was responsible for the collapse of the Penderdome and for the deaths of 8 people.
Mrs. Ryder, let's just get one thing clear that counsel for the defence has conveniently managed to obscure. Now, after the Bellenden inquiry discovered that the Penderdome collapsed because the A column of the South Tower had been improperly secured, you discharged Joseph Carney from your employ, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Well, you must then have believed in the inquiry's findings.
There were pressures on me after that finding, obviously. I had to take positive action.
Yes, but having now apparently come to the conclusion that the inquiry was wrong, you still haven't bothered to reinstate Mr. Carney.
Well, no. You see, I wasn't...
Mrs. Ryder, you do agree that there is no logical reason that you can put forward for doubting the inquiry's findings?
I'm in the construction industry, and perhaps that entitles me to make more general observations in that other construction firms aren't using King Kong muscle extensively. There has to be a reason.
Yes, but one that can't be demonstrated.
I really can't.
Well, Mrs. Ryder, and of course it would suit your book if it came to be scientifically accepted that there was some undiscovered fault in King Kong muscle, wouldn't it?
What do you mean by that?
Well, despite the fact that the evidence is such here today that a prima facie case may be made out against the accused, your firm is still very much involved, Mrs. Ryder. It would make things considerably easier all round if it were to be thought that it was not your long-time employee, but the materials he used that were at fault, wouldn't it?
Are you suggesting that I'm deliberately trying to give King Kong muscle a bad name in order to avoid responsibility?
I did not say that.
It may interest you to know that my firm is already involved in certain civil actions over this tragic business. Our conduct there will show plainly enough just what our attitude is.
Now, incidentally, on January the 10th, when you had your little talk with Carney, did you notice that he'd been drinking?
What?
Was it obvious to you on that day that your site agent wasn't entirely sober?
He wasn't drunk, if that's what you mean. His wife had just left him. He was in a bad state of mind. There were all sorts of emotional pressures on him. He was upset.
And busily installing a crucial main support column in a new building the while. I see. Thank you, Mrs. Ryder.
He was all right. You have no reason to infer that he wasn't, or to suggest that I was at fault either. I examined his reports, timesheets and so on. Everything was in order, being done perfectly.
Yes, but did you examine the actual construction work itself, Mrs. Ryder?
Joe Carney was always completely reliable. I never had any reason to doubt his work.
Until you dismissed him, of course. Thank you, Mrs. Ryder.
No further questions, Mrs. Ryder.
Then you may leave the box. Thank you, Mrs. Ryder. Mr. O'Connor?
That completes the case for the defence, my lord.
Very well, then. Mr. Lloyd?
Members of the jury.
Now, members of the jury, in this case, there are 3 possible verdicts. Not guilty, guilty of murder, or guilty of manslaughter. Now, first, if you are not satisfied that the accused caused the collapse of that building, then, of course, your verdict will be one of not guilty. Second, if you are satisfied that the accused caused the collapse of the building and that he foresaw that some person or persons might suffer death or grievous bodily harm as a result of his actions, then your verdict will be one of guilty of murder. Third, if you are satisfied that the accused caused the collapse of this building, but through carelessness or, that is to say, gross neglect, then your verdict would be one of manslaughter. For killing by gross negligence is manslaughter. Now, members of the jury, you've heard all the evidence, and it will be for you to decide. You must not let yourselves be swayed by the matter of Mr. Carney's opinions. Consider only whether they were sufficiently intense as to influence his actions. Now, let me remind you once again, members of the jury, that it is for the prosecution to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. Now, would you please retire to consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached verdicts upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On the first count of murder, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the second count of manslaughter, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all?
Yes.
Joseph Carney, you have been found guilty on the charge of manslaughter. As construction site agent, you held a position of high public responsibility, and your betrayal of this responsibility by an act of gross neglect must attract a sentence of commensurate severity. Accordingly, I sentence you to 4 years' imprisonment. Take him down. It only remains for me, members of the jury, to thank you for paying such close attention to these proceedings and to release you.
All stand.
You can join another jury in assessing the facts when our cameras return to watch a leading case in the Crown Court.